Hey guys, I'm Hunter with Brunk Outdoors. In this video we're going to be going over a client's property. He recently purchased online consulting for private land, and we're actually going to go down to his farm in 2 weekends and do an in-person consulting for him and kind of follow up with what we've done on the map so far. Hopefully he really liked what we gave him on the maps, and I actually asked if he could make this video just to explain it a little bit more, what we have planned for his property, and that way you guys can learn, he can learn from it, and kind of know all of our thinking, because there is a lot of reasoning that goes behind everything that we drew up on this property and on any properties that we do. And we'll probably ask pretty much most of our clients if we can do videos like these outlining how we're going to set up these, how we would, if we personally own these farms, how we would set them up to hopefully maximize the success that they have. And we'll probably ask pretty much all of our clients if we can do that if it's private land. But I wanted to mention that we do have public land, private land consulting, both online and in person. And if you guys want to sign up for that, you can go to our website, brunkoutdoors.com, and pull it up. There's several pricing options as far as how big your land is, how many. Just because our time is valuable and we have a limited amount of time, both of us either have a full-time job or I'm a full-time student, so our time's valuable, and we have to charge a little bit more for huge pieces of private land rather than like a 40 or 50 acre piece, obviously. So our prices range from, I think it's $20 to $75, but overall very affordable. And then we do have on-site consulting too that we just started offering, and we have a couple trips planned, like I mentioned, and those can range in price, but that just basically depends on where you're at and how we can cover travel expenses, and then kind of how much our weekend is worth as well. That plays into it a little bit. So anyway, if you guys want to go check that out and support us, that'd be awesome. I think it'll gain a lot of value for you guys, and it'll also help us out a lot. But now we're going to dive into this property and show you guys how, if we owned this farm, exactly how we would set it up, and tell you kind of why we would do what we would do. And I think this is more helpful than just sitting and picking random spots on the map too. If you're trying to learn how to map white-tailed deer, this is going to be a really helpful series, and all these videos are going to be very helpful, just because we'll dive into a lot of whitetail behavior and things that. Most of the things that we're talking about are very repeatable on your land, on your private land, anything like that. So this should be a really good video, and all these videos in this topic should be really helpful. Alright guys, so here's this property. I guess I'll start with just how we kind of approach something like this, and kind of the first thing that we're going to look at when we start with anything. I guess when we're talking private land, I think my first train of thought and the first thing we're going to focus on is getting a main destination food area. It doesn't have to be on the property that you're hunting, but there should be somewhere where all the deer should end up at night, and they can feed and have plenty of room to walk around. It should be a pretty big area. You know, a small 1 acre, 2 acre food plot is not going to get the job done here for a big destination food plot. It should feed like pretty much the whole deer herd that you're going to be hunting, and it could be several different ones, but at least one big destination food area. And I think that's kind of the number one thing that I look at on private land. Now, if we're talking about public land, I think the first thing I look at is bedding and secure areas, and that's equally as important on private land. But the first thing I'm going to look at is that predictable food source, that it might not be in daylight, but at some point during the 24-hour period, deer should end up in this big food source most of the time. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to establish, and what that does is it's going to generate a lot more predictable movement from bedding to food during all times of the hunting season, and you're going to be able to predict where does are going to bed, you're going to predict where bucks are going to bed farther away from the food source, and it just makes the property a lot more predictable. It'll make it hold more deer. So I wanted to get that set in stone. I decided that obviously it's easier to get a destination food source in an area without trees, so we've kind of focused in on this area for most of the food on the property. And we'll zoom in. So I've marked off, this is about a 6-acre area, and our plan for this is to basically have it be row crops. That's going to be the best food that you're going to be able to offer is going to be row crops, whether it's beans for year-round food or corn for food in the fall and winter. Ideally, this is going to be put into row crops. I understand that not everyone has access to the equipment to put in row crops, so there are other options, or maybe this could also be something like alfalfa. A big clover field would also be good. I don't think it'd be quite as good as row crops or alfalfa, but that would be a good option as well. But we want a big food source. I guess if you don't have options to get the equipment in to put in row crops or have someone cash rented or anything like that, what you can do is maybe start frost seeding this whole thing, and it might take a while if you don't have the equipment to do this when you have to use methods like frost seeding, but eventually this should be turned into a huge food source. You might have to, if you have to frost seed it, you might have to mow it several times, kill it down with glyphosate, other weed killers, and this is probably going to be over the course of a summer. You're going to have to do several killings with glyphosate, mow it, and then that next winter you should have a lot less thatch. This looks like it's an overgrown field, so I'm guessing that he's going to have to do some prep work over the course of the summer. So that winter, going into the winter, you should have a lot less thatch, and by the end of it, coming out into the spring, you should have a lot less weed competition growing back and have a lot more open areas. And this would set up very well in that scenario for frost seeding. So then in February, March, you can go in and overseed with clovers, clover, chicory. You might be able to do alfalfa. Any type of small seed would be really good for frost seeding. So if you don't have equipment, that's a viable option. You'll overseed it. I'd probably do about twice the recommended rate if it was like a tilled piece of land, and all that freezing and thawing that'll happen in the springtime should get good enough seed to soil contact, and you should be able to get a decent food source established if you don't have the equipment to put in good row crops. So that was the first thing we focused on. We wanted to get a good big destination food source, and like I said, this will make a lot more predictable movement. And from there we focused on the greens. We wanted to have greens that we can hunt adjacent to this food source, but also like off to the side so that we can get in and out. Another thing to mention before I get too far into this is that when you do create a big destination food source that all of the deer are going to end up on at some point during the day, it is absolutely crucial that you don't keep spooking deer off of it. That's one of the easiest ways to screw up a hunting parcel, is to create somewhere where it's going to be so attractive that all the deer go in an area, and then you spook it out and have deer running off all the time. They're going to avoid that area and your whole property altogether. So it can be your best friend, but it can also be your worst nightmare, and you have to keep that in mind. So we also have a lot of switchgrass screens and everything built in around it, and I'll talk about ways that you might be able to access around this so that you're not doing that. It's very important that you don't ruin your property when you're trying to make it more attractive. So I wanted to get greens adjacent to this big destination food source. Assuming that this is row crop, that would be ideal. But I wanted to get greens adjacent to it. A lot of times when deer are bedded, they're going to go for those green food sources before they go into grain. And so if you can have green adjacent to grain sources, it's going to make it a lot easier to hunt this big area here. It's about 6 acres. This area is about 6 acres, so it'd be a lot harder to bow hunt that than it would be to bow hunt these 1 acre or under fields that you can control the deer movement a little bit more. And the other thing too is that you don't want to have these deer sticking in these small food plots. Some people call kill plots even, but these are going to be greens, and hopefully, I mean, it might not work out exactly like this, and you're going to have to manage your hunting pressure and make sure you're not spooking deer. But the idea is that the deer are going to come out into this field during the shooting hours, and then they're going to work off into this bigger field when it comes time to get down to your tree stand. and you have to go back in. So the goal is that we're not spooking deer. You don't want to have these small kill plots to be too big, and we've done that in the past. We made that mistake. You don't want them to be too big to where you have a herd of deer sitting in there and then you spook them all out when you get down from your tree stand. Because if that's the case, then you're not going to be able to hunt any of these food plots. You're going to be much better off hunting the timber around them and not spooking them all the time than you would be trying to get really aggressive and going and spooking deer. And you're also not probably going to be hunting this big destination field very often unless you have a gun, just because it's very hard to control movement and you're probably going to spook a lot of the deer. So, get back to greens before I go on a tangent. These two obviously are very adjacent. These are probably, I would say, going to be the hardest ones to get in and out of without spooking deer, so you're going to have to manage your hunting pressure a lot on those ones. I wanted a green plot here because it's also adjacent to the field. This one you might be able to hunt a little bit easier. Your access is right by, you have really good access in and out for that one. You don't have to travel a very long distance. It looks like you can come in the back up through here, and then hopefully they'll come out. You shouldn't spook anything like that. They'll come out, feed around, and then hopefully they'll end up out in your big destination food plot area here, and then you can come back right the way you came in, and that should be a pretty bulletproof plan for that area. It's small enough where you can shoot a lot of it, and it provides another just corridor of travel. Say if they want to go down this ridge or up this overgrown field here, they can go from bedding to greens to big food area. And so that's another green plot that I had planned up. Over here we have another green food plot area here, and this one doesn't really coincide with a line of travel going from bedding to greens to big food source, but it does offer a good green source right next to a bedding area. Looks like this is probably very thick cedars. We got a lot of nice bedding area points for bucks to bed on. Very secluded, not within a couple 100 yards of the major food source that we created, so there should be less does bedding in there. I bet there'll be does bedding all around this food plot, but still leaves plenty of the room for the bucks. And this will be a really nice area during the rut, especially when you're not just hunting just traditional food bedding patterns. And then right adjacent to that we have a switchgrass area outlined, and this should all become really thick, really tall. If this is already really thick, you really don't need to do that. Just want to make sure that this is really good bedding. It looks like a little bit more of an open area, so that's a really easy way to get that to thicken up and create just another bedding area right there. Bucks are going to bed all around that. There might be does bedding in it. Bucks could bed in it, but like I said, it's really close to that food source. And one thing I wanted to mention is that you're going to get does bedding. Well, I guess we'll go over the doe bedding now on kind of what I foresee to happen. Is we're going to get most of our doe bedding on this property is going to be within 200 yards of any of the food sources we create. So I didn't really mark all the areas that should be doe bedding areas, but I basically told them that you want to make sure that you have thick areas within these 200 yard distances, and that's likely where most of your doe bedding is going to take place, 200 yards from these major food sources. So if you have thick areas, it looks like it's pretty thick timber. So if you have those areas, it's really thick, diverse timber, it looks like from the maps. Looks like there's some old cuttings. You can see different transition lines through here. If you have thick areas, you probably don't have to worry about doe bedding too much, and you just make sure you're not spooking it out. From there, I guess I'll talk about buck bedding next, because I kind of led into it. But the bucks are going to bed basically behind the does from the direction of food. So you're going to have does bedding within the first 200 yards, and then you might get another 100 yards where you'll start getting into bucks, and anything behind that is kind of where I feel like most of the buck bedding is going to occur. And bucks also like to bed on points in hilly country. This looks like it's kind of just rolling hills, not too steep, so it might be a little bit more difficult to predict buck bedding, but they should still like these knobs where they can have escape routes going over the top of these hills. They can escape down, they can bed with the wind going over their back, and as long as you have thick areas, I think most of the buck bedding is going to still occur on these points, even though they're not real steep hills. That's a good place to have them. And we thought about recommending hinge cuts, but it really didn't make sense to recommend any hinge cuts just looking at the property online. We basically want to just identify, after we said, okay, make sure you have thick areas within the 200 yards from your food sources, we basically said, okay, at each of these points that we identified as areas that could be buck bedding, make sure you have a ½ acre to 1 acre to maybe 2 acres of just real thick cover that they can bed in. And then that's what you need for bedding areas. A bedding area doesn't have to be 20 acres in size. You can have a sanctuary, or you can have a big 40-acre plot or whatever that you could count as almost like a bedding area, although I think that's a little too broad. But you could have a 15-acre sanctuary that count as a bedding area, but the actual bedding areas that you create does not need to be that big. You can tackle it, a ½ acre to 1 acre at a time, and that's really all that you need for a bunch of deer to pile into and feel secure. So I wanted to mention that rather than recommending 15-acre hinge cuts or anything big in that spectrum, I think it's a lot more efficient to go in on all of the areas that you're likely to have deer bedding occur and just make sure that you have that thick, high stem count areas, diverse habitat, daytime browse, stuff like that. You may have to hinge cut, you may not. Like I said, this looks like really thick, diverse timber, so he might not have to do anything when it comes to buck bedding. And if you don't have to do anything, then don't. Just leave it natural. Bucks like to bed on transition lines, so there could be a buck bed here as well that I didn't mark. It's not really on a knob, but he can still have the wind blowing on his back. It looks like these are probably cedars. He can bed with this right on the transition of cedars to hardwood. Just stuff like that. You're looking for a transition line. This looks like it's a little bit of a soft edge in the habitat right here on a knob. That's probably a good location for bucks to bed. This is a railroad track, not a road, and in my experience, they really don't care about that. I've hunted around a lot of railroad tracks, so he's going to have no trouble just looking over those railroad tracks. It's not going to bother him at all. Also, if you have turkeys, they're going to flock to these railroad tracks to have gravel. Helps for digestion for them if they eat that gravel. And they'll strut these like crazy. Just a side note. But yeah, make sure you have good thick cover on these knobs, and you'll have a lot of good locations for buck beds. And from there, you'll just have to scout and locate which ones they're actually using. That way, you can figure out which ones to hunt, which ones are feasible to hunt, so you're not spooking them out and stuff like that. I guess I'll talk about our switchgrass screens, and this goes back to not spooking out your food sources, or I guess just the use of switchgrass. I talked about how we brought it in right through here to hopefully get that to thicken up a little bit and create a nice bedding area there. And then we wanted to make sure you had some switchgrass screens, because if you have this area here and you just keep spooking things out, you're going to ruin your property. So we wanted to screen in. We didn't screen in everything entirely, just only things that we thought was mandatory to hopefully get you enough of an edge to sneak around the deer. We also left a little bit of room for this reason. We didn't bring this destination food source all the way up to where you can access. We kind of left it in the middle a little bit more, and then you can plant maybe a 10 yard, 15 yard wide switchgrass screen all the way around it, just in the crucial areas. We wanted one all the way around this side of it. The blue is the trails. We wanted to have a small screen on this food plot here. That way, if anything's getting over in this area here, hopefully you can try to get out of your stand, or maybe you might not have to have ground blinds too. You can get in and out of them a lot easier than tree stands sometimes, and hopefully you'll be able to get out of them without being detected. Switchgrass screens all the way around this field, kind it also helps make the plot feel a little bit more secure for them, so they're not looking into a huge area. And again, it's going to help with your entry and exit. Now you can see, okay, well, I guess we can start talking about trails and entry and exit. I guess this is most of our main entrance for this part of the property, so I just kind of worked off my trails based on that. Basically, a good rule of thumb is usually you can access through the open areas during the daytime to get into your afternoon stands, and then you can hopefully walk through like the trees and go around some of those food sources when you're coming in during the dark, or coming back out during the dark, and not spook deer, because again, we're trying to make very predictable movement. Hopefully by the end of that time, and it's imperative that you wait till pitch black to start walking out, or you get up early enough to where you can start walking in the pitch black, because a lot of times you can walk right up to deer with a flashlight if it's actually that pitch black area. If you wait till it's gray light, they're likely going to spook, but when it's pitch black like that, a lot of times you can walk right up on them. It doesn't matter if you have a headlight on or anything, and then hopefully you can wait for them to move off. But I have some trails going around the perimeter. I think I did a perimeter trail basically on this whole property, and I wouldn't recommend that for every single property, but for this one it really made sense. It's going to allow you a lot of access, and a lot of the bedding should be internal on this property. These are 40-acre blocks here. I forgot to mention that this property is just a shade over 120 acres, but a lot of the bedding on this property is internal, so I don't think it's going to mess anything up having perimeter trails all the way around it. It's just going to help your access a lot, and kind of create a soft edge. You know, maybe the deer know if they go over this trail, they're going to get shot at by the neighbors. I don't know, but it'll give you a lot better access. And yeah, so I decided to put a perimeter trail all the way around the outside of that. I think it makes a lot of sense on this particular piece, because all of the bedding and the food is internal. So starting from this access point, like I was going to do, let's say we want to hunt this food plot back here. You may be able to do that in the morning, kind of play it by ear. Hopefully all the deer are out in here, and if you go in the pitch black like I was talking about, you might be able to walk this trail just right in here, right along this cover. It might be far enough away from where they should be, or they could be in the cover, or they could be in these staging areas here, but just try to slowly walk in there, and you might be able to get set up in there in the morning and get undetected and have a good hunt in there. In the evening, obviously you're going to be able to walk, or you should be able to walk just along this path really easily and not spook anything going in, and then coming out, I think we already talked about that. Wait for it to be pitch black, and hopefully they worked in these food sources and you can sneak your way out. This, we've kind of talked about access. This field here, I wanted to go around this main food source. We're going to have a trail running just on the edge here, kind of on the edge of this cover and over the hill a little ways. Hopefully it'll allow pretty good entry and exit routes from there. And then this goes around all the way to the perimeter. And this trail here is another perimeter trail, but it'll be really helpful for access with this stand. Because if you come in here and you hunt, if you're going to hunt this stand in the afternoon, you'll probably start by walking this trail in. You're going to be walking these open areas to your stand, and then hopefully you'll have a good hunt. Maybe you don't kill anything, maybe you do, but all the deer should be working their way. This is basically the line of travel that we're trying to create. So all the deer are going to end up back here, and it wouldn't make much sense to come trampling through here and then go and try to and accidentally spook everything out. So I wanted a perimeter trail, and this can be just a footpath where you basically go in with clippers and try to clear some of the brush away, and just try to make it easier access for yourself, and so that you're not leaving unnecessary amounts of ground scent, and it's not touching your pant legs or anything like that. But that can be a real small trail, and the idea is that nothing's going to be in there if you wait till pitch black, and even if it is, hopefully you can hear them before they spook, and you can wait for them to move off. So that's kind of access for that stand mainly, and then more of the perimeter trail. We got trail running all the way up to the road up here. He also said he had a little bit of a trespassing issue along this road here. So basically we've told him that he needs to make sure he has really good fences, really good signs, Maybe put trail cameras out. Let them know that you're patrolling the area. Have a presence in your area that you're going to be hunting. Also, if you can, I don't know if there's enough open area in here to put a switchgrass screening, but try to create some sort of really thick screening. This could already be really thick timber, but it might be useful to plant a lot of conifers along this edge here so people can't see in, shoot in, poach deer. Make sure you have locks, gated locks, everything like that. Just make it so that you're trying to deter it as much as possible, and that's really all you can do. A lot of times the state agencies have programs where you can buy trees to plant, and then it'll be a cheaper way to create a really dense, really thick screen along that edge if you have trespassing problems, and you can get trees for like 25 cents a piece through a lot of the state agencies. So check into that. Have this trail running. If you're hunting this stand, obviously you can use this trail for entry and exit. Up here we basically can go around a lot of the bedding, and this trail around the perimeter is going to allow you to access. I haven't placed all the stands that I think I placed the ones that really jump out to me from an aerial picture, and then from there, and there could be more too, but from there we're going to be able to hunt this bedding really well from this access trail and from the outside in. We should be able to get close to the beds and have really good hunts in the bedding areas as well, but it's really hard without actually being there in person. So I just went ahead and marked the bedding areas that we want to create, and then from there he's going to have to go in and figure out how he can hunt those himself. And then I just picked the ones that really stand out to me. So, like, you can hunt, I don't know, so we'll pick a bedding area that hopefully is going to turn out to be a really good bedding area. I think this could be a good spot up in here. Could be a really good bed. Obviously, he can access through this trail up here, and then on a south wind, he can be downwind of the bedding area. You pretty much can get right on the edge of it, and then deer are going to meander through this bedding area. During the rut, bucks are going to scent check the downwind side, so that's going to be a really hot spot. And then even outside of the rut, deer aren't going to just bed down and hole up for the entire day. They're going to browse around whatever bedding area you create. They're probably going to browse around a 1 acre or 2 acre area. They're going to be on their feet at some point during the daytime. So if you can get right on the edge with a setup on the downwind side, you can hunt that bedding area effectively. Just make sure that you're not over pressuring these bedding areas, and maybe apply a little bit of pressure for a few days, and then don't go in there again for a month or something like that. And try to get a survey of what's using that bedding area, have productive hunts, and then leave it alone. It's imperative that you don't over pressure it, but you should also be able to hunt it a little bit. And then, so I guess maybe the final thing to talk about is stands that did jump out to me from the aerial photo. This one I think could be a pretty cool location. You can see there's kind of a soft edge in here just from the aerial photos. Looks like there might be an old cutting or something, and then an even older cutting, or from logging in past years or something like that. And you might even have an old fence line running there, I'm not sure, but there's definitely an edge there, and I almost guarantee you that there's a trail running along that edge. It's also kind of on the ridge top here, as you can see, and then you have a ditch coming up, and I don't know how big the ditch is, but we're probably going to get a little bit of a funnel action between this transition line and this ditch coming up here, so I think that could be a really good spot where a lot of trails are going to come together. Obviously, you're kind of on the back edge or you're probably still in the doe bedding on the back edge of that, and then you're in between a lot of the buck and doe bedding, and obviously we've created a lot of really predictable movement from bedding to food going in there, and that's going to be one that's really hard to access. You might only get a few hunts in there a year if you want to keep all the deer on your property and try not to spook them out. So that might be one that you really wait for the right time. And it's going to be hard to access it with the wind, but that is probably going to be a killer spot. It's just going to be hard to hunt. Another stand that stood out to me was right here. Again, it looks like we have a nice transition line, and we're right adjacent to, I think, what could be a really good bedding area, or even up in here on these transition lines, they're probably going to be bedding too. That could be a really good stand location as well. You got easy access from this trail. You're not that far off the road. That could be a really good stand. And then this stand here, I kind of talked about already, but we're just hunting this line of travel that's probably coming up this ridge or up this ditch from bedding to food. And a lot of stuff comes together right here. You probably have a fence line on your property. It's going to force them up into this corner. It funnels in between two ponds. There's a nice transition on this overgrown field. Good staging area before they go into these plots. Really, that could be a really good, really hot stand location there. Maybe a place to put a mock scrape, something like that. And then the rest of them were on these food plots, as you can see. And I think I've already talked about those a little bit. Those could be blinds too as well if it makes it easier to access. And then the rest of the stand locations are probably going to have to come from just walking around the land yourself. And then just make sure you're adjacent to the bedding on good trails, and you're hunting movement that's likely to occur. So, well, I think that pretty much sums it up for what I'm going to recommend be done for this property. There might be changes when we go and walk it and see it in person, but from a mapping perspective, we figured out a lot, and we have a really good game plan to work off of when we go there. And you can do the same thing for your properties, or shoot us a message, have us do it. We have pretty affordable rates, and we can do something the same as what we just showed you. Hopefully that wraps it up, and I got enough talking in. I think the video turned out longer than what I thought it was going to be, but I'm pretty excited about this client's property here. Even disregarding what the pressure the neighbors might put on or what kind of management they might have, this property has all of the ingredients that it needs to be able to hold most of the daytime activity, and that's what's going to influence the deer herd. That's what you're hunting. That's the whole goal, is daytime movement. And even 120 acres is a pretty good sized property, but it's not obviously huge, and obviously a deer's home range is more like a mile. So it's big to have a property that can hold pretty much all the daytime movement. There's that square mile home range of a buck, but then there might only be that just this property daytime movement home range. And if he hunts it right and has it set up this way, I think he could really be a big influencer on the deer herd and have really awesome hunting. And that might mean a variety of things depending on his goals, whether he wants big bucks or just good hunting. It's good to manage for mature deer, because when you have the mature deer, you're going to have a lot of other deer as well, and it's just the best way to manage a property. So hopefully you learned something out of this video. We have a good long-term plan of what I think would be the best setup on this property, and then you can keep chipping away at it from there. So anyway, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, make sure you hit the like button, comment if you want to see more videos like this, and subscribe to see future content. Thanks.